My name is Vera Kowalski. I'm 34 years old. And the Thanksgiving my brother told me the holiday was being scaled back this year was the night I finally understood that being left out of a room is not the same thing as being left out of the record. He called on a Monday. I was driving home from work, hands-free, half listening to the radio when his name appeared on the dashboard screen. He said he and my mother had decided to keep things simple this year. He said our cousin Darren was dealing with some health stuff, and a big gathering felt like the wrong tone. He said he hoped I understood, and that maybe we'd do something in January, just the three of us. I said of course. I said to give Mom my love. I hung up and kept driving. I took my usual route home, which happened to pass within 4 blocks of my mother's house. On an impulse I didn't examine too closely, I turned onto her street. There were 14 cars parked along the curb and in the driveway. I recognized my Aunt Patricia's silver sedan, my cousin Renata's truck, and a catering van from a company I'd seen at a neighbor's party 2 summers before. I sat at the stop sign at the end of the block for a moment. Then I drove home. What none of them knew, not my brother Dale, not my mother, not the developer's attorney who would call my phone by misdial 3 weeks later, was that the land parcel Dale had been quietly negotiating to sell for the better part of 8 months had 2 names on the deed. Our father had recorded it that way in 1998, when I was 7 years old and Dale was 12, and neither of us had thought much about it in the decade since. Dale, apparently, had not thought about it at all. I did not turn around. I did not call my mother that night. I went home, heated up leftovers, and sat at my kitchen table looking at the grain of the wood for a while. That was the whole of what I did. I want to tell you about the land first, because the land is where everything starts. My father grew up in a rural county about 90 minutes from the city where we were raised. His parents had farmed it, soybeans mostly, with a rotation of winter wheat, until his father's back gave out in the mid-80s and the operation wound down to something more modest. When my grandfather died in 1991, the land passed to my father and his brother Gerald in equal shares. Gerald had moved to Arizona by then and had no interest in the agricultural side of things, so my father managed the parcel on his own for the better part of a decade, not farming it himself but leasing it to a neighboring operation, a family named Przybylski, who worked it as an extension of their own acreage. The lease was straightforward, a fixed annual payment, renewable each year, with either party able to exit on 60 days' notice. My father used the income to supplement his salary. He worked in municipal and the land came up in those estate conversations. Lewis explained the deed structure, the joint ownership, the equal shares. Dale was 27 at the time, and he nodded through the meeting in the way he nodded through things he found tedious. He asked if the lease income would continue. Lewis said yes, as long as the Przybylski family wanted to continue, and the co-owners agreed to the arrangement.
Dale said fine.
I said fine. We signed the documents Lewis put in front of us. That was 12 years before the Thanksgiving with 14 cars. In the years between my father's death and that November, the land operated exactly as it had while he was alive. The Przybylski family, by that point it was the son, a man named Eric Przybylski, who had taken over from his father, continued to work the acreage under the same basic lease terms, updated periodically to reflect adjustments to the annual rate. I received my share of the lease income each year, deposited to the same account my father had used, which I had converted to my own name during the estate process. The annual payment was not large. My share ran to roughly $6,200 a year, which covered a portion of my property taxes on my own home and went otherwise unremarked into the general flow of my finances. Dale received the same. We never discussed it. It was simply a thing that happened each spring, like the renewal of an insurance policy or the filing of a tax return. What I did not know, and would not know until the developer's attorney called, was that Dale had been in conversation with a commercial real estate development company called Meridian Land Partners since the previous February. Meridian was assembling parcels in the county for what their materials described as a mixed-use logistics corridor, warehousing, light industrial, access road infrastructure, and our parcel sat at the edge of the target zone. They had approached Dale directly through a broker after pulling public deed records and identifying the ownership. The broker, a man named Curtis Halley, had apparently explained the co-ownership structure to Dale at some point in those early conversations. Dale had apparently told Curtis that his co-owner, meaning me, was not involved in land decisions and would follow his lead. Curtis had apparently passed this characterization along to Meridian's attorney, a woman named Stephanie Voss, whose office had been managing the transaction on the Meridian side. None of this was information I had at the time. I would piece it together later, through conversations with Stephanie Voss and with Louis Parrott, whom I called the day after the misdial. What I had, on that Tuesday afternoon in late November, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar area code, was a 3-minute conversation with a woman who introduced herself as Stephanie Voss, said she was calling on behalf of Meridian Land Partners, and asked whether she was speaking with Vera Kowalski, co-owner of the parcel at the recorded address in question. I said she was. There was a pause. A specific kind of pause. The kind that means someone has just registered that the information in their file and the information in front of them do not match. I was expecting to reach Dale Kowalski, she said. He's my brother, I said. We're co-owners. 50% each. It's on the deed. Another pause, shorter this time. I see. I apologize for the confusion. I was given a different contact number. What can I help you with? I said. She hesitated, and then she said she was following up on the signature package that had been sent to the co-owners for the purchase and sale agreement on the parcel. She asked whether I had received it. I had not received it. I told her that. The pause that followed this was the longest one. I want to be precise about what I did in the 4 days between that phone call and the conversation with Dale because the sequence matters more than the outcome. The first thing I did was call Louis Parrott. He was still practicing, semi-retired, his assistant told me, but he took my call within the hour. I explained what had happened, the Thanksgiving exclusion, the misdial, the purchase and sale agreement I had apparently not been sent. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "All right. Have Stephanie Voss send the signature package to my office. Don't sign anything. Don't call Dale yet." I did not ask him why not. Louis had been my father's attorney for 20 years. I trusted his sequencing. Stephanie Voss sent the package to Louis's office the following morning. Louis reviewed it and called me that afternoon. He walked me through the structure of the agreement. The sale price, which was listed at $2.8 million for the full parcel, meaning $1.4 million to each co-owner. The contingencies, which included a soil assessment already completed and an access road easement already negotiated with the county, and the closing timeline, which had a hard deadline of December 19th, less than 4 weeks out. The agreement required both co-owners' signatures. Without mine, the transaction could not close. Louis asked me what I wanted to do. I told him I needed a day to think. I thought about it that evening, sitting at the same kitchen table where I'd sat the night of Thanksgiving. I thought about the 14 cars. I thought about Dale's voice on the phone, pleasant, practiced, the voice of someone who has said a thing so many times it has stopped sounding like a lie. I thought about 8 months of conversations with Curtis Halley and Stephanie Voss that had never once included a phone call to me. I thought about my father, who had recorded 2 names on that deed in 1998 because he understood something about fairness that his son had apparently not inherited. I called Louis the next morning and told him I wanted to meet with Stephanie Voss before I made any decision. I wanted to understand the transaction fully, from her side, before I signed or declined. Louis arranged the meeting for that Friday. The meeting with Stephanie Voss was at Louis's office, the same wood-paneled conference room where I had sat 12 years earlier going through my father's estate documents. She was professional, precise, and visibly uncomfortable. She had brought Curtis Halley with her, who was less comfortable and less good at hiding it. I asked them to walk me through the transaction from the beginning. They did. Meridian had identified the parcel in January. Initial conversations with Dale had begun in February. A letter of intent had been signed in April, signed by Dale alone, which Louis noted was not legally binding on the full ownership, but had set the terms that Meridian had been operating from. The purchase and sale agreement had been drafted in October and sent to Dale's personal email address. The signature package, per Curtis Halley's instructions, had been addressed to Dale's address only. I asked Curtis directly why my contact information had not been included. He said Dale had represented himself as the primary decision-maker for the ownership group. I asked Stephanie Voss whether she had verified the ownership structure independently before sending the signature package. She said the deed had been pulled. She acknowledged that it showed 2 co-owners. I asked why, given that the package had gone to one address. She did not answer that directly. What she said was that she understood there had been a miscommunication and that Meridian was committed to proceeding correctly from this point forward. Lewis thanked her for that. Then he asked, on my behalf, for a 2-week extension on the closing deadline to allow me adequate time to review the agreement and obtain independent counsel, if I chose to do so. Stephanie Voss said she would need to consult with her client, but that she expected an extension would be granted given the circumstances. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. I shook hands with both of them on the way out. Curtis Halley's hand, I noticed, was slightly cold. Dale called me that evening. He had, I learned later, spoken to Curtis Halley within an hour of the meeting ending. His opening was controlled. He said he'd heard I'd met with the Meridian people. He said he was glad I was getting up to speed. He said he should have looped me in earlier and that he was sorry about that. I let him finish. When were you planning to tell me? I said. I was going to call once the terms were finalized. I didn't want to get you caught up in the back and forth before there was something real to discuss. You signed a letter of intent in April, I said. You gave them my brother's contact information as the sole decision-maker on a deed that has both our names on it. A breath on the line. I thought I could get it to a point where the decision was easy for you. Here's the number, sign here. I was trying to simplify it. The decision isn't yours to simplify, I said. We own it equally. Dad put both names on that deed. Dad put your name on there because he wanted to give you something. He didn't expect you to, he stopped. To what? I said. He didn't finish the sentence. What he had been about to say, I think, was something like to be involved in the decision-making. He had the self-awareness, at least, to recognize how that would land. I need to review the agreement with Lewis, I said. I'll let you know what I decide. The deadline is December 19th, he said. I know what the deadline is, I said. We said goodbye. I spent the following 10 days reviewing the agreement with Lewis. He walked me through every clause, the purchase price, the proration of the lease income through the closing date, the representations and warranties, the indemnification provisions, the closing cost allocations. The price was fair. The terms were standard. Meridian was a legitimate buyer. The logistics corridor project was real, and the $1.4 million I would receive as my share of the proceeds was a genuine and significant amount. Lewis was clear that from a purely financial standpoint, the transaction was sound. He was equally clear, without editorializing, that I had the right to decline. A co-owner with an undivided 50% interest cannot be compelled to sell. Without my signature, there was no transaction. I asked him what he would do. He said that wasn't his call to make, and that in 32 years of practice, he had learned that the right answer to that question was always the client's own. I thought about it for 3 more days. What I kept returning to was not the money. The money was real, and I was not indifferent to it, but it was not what occupied the space where I turned things over. What occupied that space was simpler. My brother had looked at a deed with 2 names on it and decided, for 8 months, that one of those names didn't need to know. He had arranged a Thanksgiving gathering for 14 people and told the other name on the deed that the holiday was being kept small. He had built an entire transaction on the assumption that I would go along with whatever he presented once it was far enough along to feel like a fait accompli. That assumption was the thing I kept examining from different angles. On the 9th day, I called Lewis and told him I would sign. He asked if I was sure. I said I was. I signed the agreement the following morning. Lewis notarized it and delivered it to Stephanie Voss's office before noon. The transaction closed on December 17th, 2 days before the deadline. I was not present at the closing table. Lewis represented my interests and called me when it was done. He said it had gone cleanly. He said Meridian was professional and the title had transferred without complications. He said my share of the proceeds, minus closing costs and Lewis's fee and the proration of the final lease payment to Eric Przybylski, had been wired to the account I had specified. The net to me was $1,367,400. I was at my kitchen table when Lewis called. After we hung up, I sat there for a few minutes. Then I got up, put on my coat, and went for a walk in the cold. I was not thinking about the money particularly. I was thinking about my father at 34, which was the age I was now, sitting at a desk somewhere and updating a deed to include both his children's names. He had not explained it to either of us. He had simply done it. I thought about that for the length of the walk, and then I came home. Dale called me on December 18th, the day after the closing. He had received his proceeds as well, and the call had a different quality than any call we'd had in a long time. He said he was glad it had worked out. He said he appreciated that I had moved forward on it. I said I thought it was the right decision for the land. He said yes, and then after a pause he said, I should have called you in February. Yes, I said. I didn't think you'd want to be involved in the back and forth. I know, I said. That's the part that mattered. Not the back and forth. The assumption. He was quiet for a moment. I heard you met with Stephanie Voss without telling me first. I met with her and Louis, I said. I was getting up to speed. That's what you said you wanted. Another pause, and then something shifted in the silence. Not quite resolution, but a kind of acknowledgement that neither of us had more ground to hold right then. Merry Christmas, he said. Merry Christmas, I said. We hung up. In January, I had coffee with my mother. Not to discuss the land sale. That was done. The proceeds distributed. Louis's final accounting filed. I went because she called and asked, and because I had decided, after some thought, that there were things between my mother and me that had nothing to do with Dale, and were worth the effort of untangling. She did not mention Thanksgiving directly. I did not bring it up. We talked about other things, her plans for the spring, a trip she was considering, the small domestic news of her days. At some point, she said she was glad the land situation had resolved. She said she knew it must have been a lot to navigate. She said she hoped Dale and I were okay. I said I thought we were, in the limited and careful sense of two people who are figuring out how to be honest with each other after a long time of not being. She nodded. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I did not tell her about the 14 cars. It was not a conversation I needed to have. My father put 2 names on that deed because he understood something I have spent a long time learning to articulate. An assumption about someone's indifference is not the same thing as evidence of it. A person who does not push into rooms they weren't invited into is not a person who doesn't notice the rooms. She is a person who is waiting for the record to be read correctly. The deed was on file for 26 years. It was public. It simply required someone to look at both names and take them equally seriously. That is the only thing I ever needed anyone to do. I want to ask you something specific. There's a moment in this story. It's the pause in Stephanie Voss's voice when I told her I hadn't received the signature package, in a conference room with Louis Parrott, with Curtis Halley sitting across the table. That 47-minute meeting where the shape of 8 months of decisions became visible all at once. If you've ever been in a room where the record corrected someone's assumption about you, not dramatically, not loudly, just factually, I want to know what that moment felt like from your side of the table. Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this story found you at the right moment, subscribe. New stories every week. All of them about people who were quietly right all along, and the moment the document proved it. I'm Vera. Thank you for being here.